I walked outside that morning expecting nothing more exciting than a quiet sunrise and a cup of coffee. Instead, I found an HOA Karen standing in my driveway, snapping photos of my $100 000 Dodge Charger, like she'd just uncovered a stolen government vehicle. "This car violates HOA standards," she barked without even acknowledging me. "It looks like a police cruiser. I'm calling the authorities to have it impounded." Just like that, no warning, no conversation, she decided she had the power to take my car away. And here's the part that really punched me in the gut. She had absolutely no idea who she was threatening, no idea that the suspicious vehicle she wanted hauled off belonged to a traffic cop, no idea that she had just started a battle she could not possibly win. Right there, barefoot on my driveway, I made myself a quiet promise. If she wanted a war over my car, I would give her one, and she'd regret picking this fight long before the end. Before we dive into the story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you've ever dealt with a crazy HOA, hit subscribe so we can see how these stories end together. I picked up my coffee from the porch railing and tried to steady my thoughts, but the peace I'd hoped for in Willow Bend Meadows had evaporated completely. When I first moved here, I thought I'd finally found a place where my work life and personal life could stay worlds apart. As a traffic cop, well, technically a traffic enforcement lieutenant, I spend my days untangling chaos on the roads, calming down angry drivers, and explaining the same 20 laws 100 different ways. By the time I get home, all I want is silence, privacy, normalcy. That's why I chose this neighborhood. Clean sidewalks, slow streets, manicured lawns. The kind of place where the biggest argument should be over whose dog keeps digging up whose garden. For the first week, I actually believed I'd found my bubble. People waved, kids rode bikes, someone even baked me cookies. It felt like the kind of place where no one cared what you did for a living, as long as you weren't lighting fireworks at 2 a.m. But that illusion shattered the moment Caroline Mathers decided my car didn't fit her vision for the community. 3 days after her first driveway ambush, I received a bright white envelope taped to my door. The logo at the top, Willow Bend Meadows HOA, looked like it had been designed by someone who got too excited with the calligraphy tool. Underneath it, a whole paragraph scolded me for violating the "no commercial vehicles in driveways" rule. According to them, my Charger was too official looking, and I was required to store it inside my garage immediately, which would have been great if my garage wasn't currently gutted and sitting half-finished thanks to the previous owner's brilliant idea to store fertilizer next to electrical wiring. I didn't panic. I didn't even get mad. I simply folded the letter and filed it away. HOA drama wasn't new to me, but usually I saw it from the outside, responding to noise complaints, domestic disputes, street parking arguments that escalated into fistfights. I never expected to star in one, and I definitely didn't expect a woman like Caroline. Every morning after that letter, she marched past my house right at 7:12 a.m., not 7:10, not 7:15, always 7:12, like she had set an alarm labeled "harass Mark." She never stopped, but her phone was always pointed at my car. Every evening around 6:30 p.m., she reappeared this time, pretending to water her already dead potted plants, while sneakily recording from the corner of her yard. The woman was committed. What made it even more surreal was how the other neighbors reacted. Some avoided eye contact, clearly terrified she'd shift her laser focus onto them. A few whispered warnings when she couldn't hear. Caroline got the Petersons fined 3 times for their Christmas lights, one man muttered while walking his dog. Drove them right out of here. Another neighbor, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned in during a community barbecue and whispered, "Do not let her find a reason to escalate." Last year, she destroyed the family with the basketball hoop, said it invited unsupervised loitering. Whatever that means, I simply nodded, keeping my badge and my amusement to myself. A week after the first letter, a second one arrived. Then a third, each one thicker than the last, each containing printed photographs of my car taken from different angles, with yellow circles around the tinted windows and red arrows pointing at the antenna. The last letter said, in bold font, "Final notice before enforcement action." That part made me laugh. If only she knew how many officers, chiefs, and sheriffs I dealt with daily, and how many of them would have loved to see this situation unfold. Still, a small part of me wanted this to stop before it spiraled out of control, so I went to the next HOA meeting, hoping maybe seeing me as a calm, polite neighbor might diffuse things. It did not. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a room that smelled like air freshener and stale resentment. I slipped into a chair in the back. Caroline strutted to the podium like she was about to argue a Supreme Court case. A projector screen lit up behind her with a title slide, "Protecting Our Community's Aesthetic Integrity." Oh boy. She clicked to the next slide, and I nearly spit out my water. It was a giant photo of my car, then another, and another. 7 different angles, each one zoomed in, as if she was documenting a rare species in the wild. Every slide came with dramatic captions: suspicious vehicle, potential law enforcement impersonation, a threat to property values. The room filled with uncomfortable shifting and strained smiles. One guy coughed so loudly I thought he might be choking just to cover his laughter. Caroline went on for nearly 20 minutes, pacing like a general preparing troops for battle. She talked about how vehicles with authoritative appearances ruin the peaceful feel of the neighborhood. She warned that if we allowed one, soon the streets would be flooded with ambiguous, government-adjacent cars. I sat silently, sipping coffee, wondering what alternate universe I'd wandered into. Finally, she unveiled her master plan, a brand new HOA rule requiring every vehicle to be submitted for board approval before being allowed to park outside. Not just commercial vehicles, every vehicle. People blinked. A couple stared at the ceiling like they were asking invisible angels for help. Caroline didn't care. She clicked to graphs. She had literally made fake graphs, showing how property values had supposedly dropped 12% since my suspicious car arrived. It was insane. Every real estate site online showed they were steadily rising, but truth wasn't the point to her. Control was. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, apologizing on Caroline's behalf like she was a misbehaving toddler. They were stuck babysitting. "Just hang in there," one whispered. "She'll get bored eventually." Unfortunately, boredom was the last thing on her schedule. 2 mornings later, I glanced out the window and froze. A tow truck sat in my driveway, the driver crawling toward my Charger with a metal hook in hand, and there she was, Caroline, arms crossed, face smug enough to power a small city. My calm finally cracked, but only slightly. I stepped outside, showed the driver my registration, and watched the blood drain from his face when he realized exactly what kind of vehicle this was. He unhooked his equipment so fast you'd think the Charger was ticking like a bomb. I wasn't told this was this kind of car," he stammered before practically sprinting back into his truck. Caroline stomped after him, shouting, "You get back here? That vehicle is unauthorized." The truck peeled out of the neighborhood so fast I could have written him a ticket. Caroline spun toward me, red-faced and shaking. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll call the police myself." That was the moment I knew this story was about to get far more entertaining, because the day she called the police was the day she would learn exactly who she'd been messing with. If I thought Caroline's obsession had reached its peak with the tow truck, I severely underestimated her capacity for dramatic escalation. Most people, after being publicly embarrassed by a fleeing tow driver, might dial things back, maybe take a day or two to reevaluate their life choices. Not Caroline Mathers. She seemed to interpret the event as a personal challenge, an invitation to dig deeper, push harder, and prove to the entire neighborhood that she, and she alone, controlled Willow Bend Meadows. The very next morning, she began what the neighbors later nicknamed Operation Neighborhood Clean Sweep. At 6:45 a.m., she marched down the street with a clipboard in hand, scrutinizing each driveway with the intensity of a detective hunting for contraband. She took photos of bicycles left slightly askew, trash cans positioned an inch too far from the garage, and a garden gnome she deemed too tacky for community standards. But she always ended at my driveway. My Charger gleamed under the early sun, freshly washed, polished, spotless. It probably made her blood boil even more. She snapped a dozen photos, muttering something like, "Unacceptable, disgraceful, who does he think he is?" I could have answered that last part easily, but watching her spiral was becoming its own entertainment. Later that day, an email blast hit the entire neighborhood. Subject line, "Urgent, community safety concerns." In the message, Caroline detailed the presence of a mysterious law enforcement-style vehicle, warned residents of potential impersonation risks, and reminded everyone that the HOA board was taking immediate action to restore order. Apparently, that action meant unleashing another round of violation notices. 3 more letters arrived for me that week. One claimed my car's antenna was military grade and therefore prohibited. Another accused me of maintaining an intimidating presence. The most ridiculous one warned that my tinted windows created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. I laughed so hard reading that, I spilled coffee on the floor. But not everyone was laughing. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Henley, a sweet widower who mostly kept to himself, pulled me aside one afternoon as I collected my mail. "She's targeting you because she can't control you," he whispered, glancing nervously toward her house. "That woman thrives on power. Don't let her scare you off. We like you here." "Thanks," I told him. "Trust me, I'm not going anywhere." Truth be told, I was curious, morbidly curious how far she would take this. Most HOA Karens stop at letters and warnings. Maybe a heated meeting or two. Very few escalate to full surveillance. Caroline was in the latter category. That weekend, I walked outside to find her sitting in a lawn chair, positioned strategically in her front yard, angled directly at my house. She didn't even pretend to hide her intentions. In her lap was her phone, recording. She typed quickly, documenting every move I made like some suburban secret agent. The neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering. One guy across the street mouthed, "She's lost it." Before closing his blinds, word spread quickly. Soon, everyone on our block referred to her setup as Mather's Command Center. Caroline, of course, acted as though she was single-handedly safeguarding the community from danger. Every day, she logged my comings and goings, what time I started the car, when I opened the door, whether I looked in her direction. I swear, if I'd sneezed too loudly, she would have added it to her notes as disruptive respiratory behavior. But the real show came 3 days later. I was sitting inside finishing paperwork when I noticed a patrol car rolling slowly down our street. I recognized Officer Martinez instantly, young, sharp, one of the most level-headed officers in the department. He was bringing me a stack of forms I'd forgotten at the station. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. But to Caroline, this was deliverance. She nearly flipped her lawn chair in excitement, scrambling to her feet and waving her arms like a castaway spotting a rescue helicopter. Martinez stepped out of the cruiser, and Caroline rushed him with such speed, he actually took a step back. Officer, thank goodness you're here," she cried. "There is a suspicious vehicle in this community. Highly suspicious, intimidating. It must be removed immediately." She pointed dramatically at my Charger, practically shaking with righteous fury. Martinez met my eyes over her shoulder. I gave him the tiniest nod, permission to play along. His expression didn't change, but I could see amusement flicker in his eyes. "I see," he said politely. "And what exactly is the concern with the vehicle?" Caroline launched into a 20-minute lecture about property values, safety, law enforcement impersonation, and how our peaceful neighborhood cannot tolerate such disruptive displays. She spoke as though she was delivering the State of the Union, complete with hand gestures and dramatic pauses. Martinez listened with saint-like patience, occasionally glancing at me to make sure I wasn't busting out laughing. Finally, as Caroline thrust her phone into his hands to show him photos she'd taken, he cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I'm familiar with the owner of that vehicle." Her eyes widened in triumph. "Excellent. Then you know why it needs to be impounded." Martinez shook his head. "No, ma'am. What I mean is, this vehicle is registered to a law enforcement officer." Caroline froze. She looked back at me, standing calmly on my porch. Arms crossed, then back at Martinez. A real one," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "A real one." The silence was delicious. Her face contorted, first confusion, then disbelief, then something dangerously close to panic. But the embarrassment hadn't fully hit yet. That part would come later. That afternoon, she escalated again. Apparently, she had spent the entire evening crafting a full PowerPoint presentation for the next HOA meeting. When Thursday rolled around, I slipped into the clubhouse once more, choosing a seat in the back. The projector flicked on, revealing the title slide, "Safeguarding Willow Bend Meadows from Unauthorized Vehicles." It was even more dramatic than the last presentation. She clicked to the next slide, and my car appeared again, bigger, zoomed in, circled, highlighted, every angle, every close-up. Every glossy inch of my Charger was displayed like an exhibit in a trial. This vehicle, she announced with theatrical disgust, has created fear, confusion, and a hostile environment. It is a threat to our peaceful community. A man near the front snorted, trying and failing to suppress laughter. Caroline pressed forward undeterred. She unveiled charts, fake charts again, claiming a steady decline in community morale since my aggressive vehicle arrived. She proposed a new board rule requiring all residents to submit their vehicles for approval directly to the HOA. Meaning her, the room erupted into murmurs. Some residents were annoyed, others were outright amused, but no one dared openly challenge her. I remained silent, because I knew something she didn't. She was about to cross the final line, the one that would bring this entire fiasco crashing down around her. 2 days later, she walked right into that line. She decided she would personally issue a resident citation to me, an imaginary document she typed up herself, ordering the removal of my vehicle within 48 hours, and when that didn't work, she took the next step. She called the police, and that was the beginning of the end for her. The morning Caroline finally made good on her threat. Started out deceptively calm. Birds were chirping, the sun was warm, and for once there was no HOA letter taped to my door. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and stepped outside, intending to enjoy a quiet Saturday. But quiet, I learned, was no longer a natural resource. In Willow Bend Meadows, not with Caroline around. At 9:07 a.m., I opened the blinds and nearly choked on my drink. Parked at an angle in my driveway was another tow truck, the biggest one I'd ever seen her hire. The driver, a wiry man with a sunburnt neck, was already crouched beside my Charger, examining the undercarriage as if trying to determine the best way to hook it without losing his job. And off to the side, arms folded like a conquering general, stood Caroline Mathers. Her face lit up when she saw me step outside. "Good morning," she sang, dripping with condescension. "I trust you received our prior notices." I didn't respond. My attention was on the tow truck driver. He kept glancing at Caroline, then back at my car, hesitation written across his face. "Sir," he said, straightening up, "I was told this was an unauthorized vehicle parked in violation of HOA standards. They said it's he checked the form in his hand, a potential law enforcement impersonation risk." I almost laughed. Almost. "Do you truly believe," I asked calmly, "that someone impersonating law enforcement would park the vehicle in their own driveway for months in broad daylight?" The driver blinked. That did seem weird." "Yeah." Caroline inserted herself between us. "Do your job," she snapped. "This vehicle needs to be removed from the community, immediately." "Ma'am," he said, "I still need to see registration documents." I retrieved the folder from inside. As soon as he saw the credentials, my name, rank, department marking, he stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. "Nope," he said. "Nope, not doing this." He shoved the paperwork back into my hands. "I'm not getting involved with a police officer's vehicle. I didn't sign up for whatever this is." Carolyn sputtered. "He's not a police officer. He's lying. Why would a police officer live here?" That one stung a little. The tow driver ignored her entirely. He climbed into his cab so quickly he nearly slammed the door on his own leg. Moments later, the truck roared to life and sped out of the neighborhood like he was fleeing a crime scene. Caroline turned scarlet. "This is not over," she hissed, jabbing a finger at me. "If I have to call the police, I will." I smiled. "Please do." For a split second, she looked thrown off, confused, as though she expected resistance instead of cooperation. But then her expression hardened into the familiar mask of entitled determination, and she made the call. What she didn't know, what made the situation so perfectly poetic, was that our dispatchers already had my address flagged. Officers knew I lived here. They knew my vehicle. They knew me, which meant the officer assigned to respond would be someone who knew exactly what they were walking into. 10 minutes later, I heard the faint hum of a police cruiser. Caroline heard it too. She straightened her posture, smoothed her hair, and plastered on a self-satisfied smile so wide you'd think she'd just won the lottery. The cruiser turned the corner. Caroline waved both arms wildly, beckoning the poor officer like she was summoning a taxi in the middle of Times Square. He parked along the curb, and the door opened. Out stepped Officer Ryan Keller. Perfect. Keller was one of the sharpest patrol officers we had, professional to the core. But he also had a sense of humor, and he knew exactly who I was. Caroline sprinted toward him before he could even shut his door. "Officer, Thank goodness you're here. This man," she jabbed her finger toward me like she was identifying a global fugitive, "has a police-style vehicle illegally parked on this property. He has ignored every HOA notice, every citation, every order to remove it. I want it impounded right now." Keller blinked slowly, glancing from her to me. "Is that so?" he asked. "Yes," Caroline continued. "He is impersonating law enforcement. I fear for the safety of our residents." Keller nodded thoughtfully. "I see." He spoke with the tone of someone examining a child's drawing while searching for the right level of polite praise. Caroline thrust her phone toward him. "I have proof, photos, videos, time-stamped documentation of his violations." Keller looked down at her screen, scrolling once or twice, then looked up at me with raised eyebrows. I shrugged. "She's been very dedicated." He cleared his throat, straightened his uniform, and addressed her with the seriousness of a man about to deliver life-changing news. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I'm familiar with the owner of this vehicle." Caroline leaned in triumphantly. "Wonderful. Then impound it immediately." Keller's lips twitched. "No, ma'am, that's not what I meant." She froze. Keller turned toward me and saluted lightly. "Good morning, Lieutenant Delaney." The silence that fell over Willow Bend Meadows could have swallowed the entire street. Several neighbors had gathered by then, some pretending to garden, some pretending to check mail, some not even pretending anymore. Phones were out, cameras rolling. It was an audience, and they knew a show-stopping twist when they saw one. A full 5 seconds passed before Caroline's brain processed what she'd just heard. "Lieutenant," she whispered, You're a police officer." "Not just a police officer," Keller said almost cheerfully. "He's our traffic enforcement lieutenant, the reason half your neighborhood speeds less than they used to." The neighbors burst into whispers and muffled laughter. Caroline's complexion shifted through a spectrum of shades, white, pink, red, and finally a deep crimson that belonged on a fire truck. But, you let me send all those notices," she stammered. "You let me call a tow truck. You seemed passionate," I replied with a shrug. "Didn't want to interrupt your hobby." Someone across the street actually clapped. Another cheered. Mr. Henley leaned against his mailbox, laughing so hard he had to wipe away tears. Keller tried. He really tried to stay professional, but even he cracked a smile. "Ma'am," he said, "from this moment forward, I strongly recommend you refrain from filing false impersonation reports and cease any attempts to tow or impound an officer's vehicle without proper cause." I didn't know," she sputtered. "How was I supposed to know?" "You could have asked," Keller replied simply. Caroline's knees seemed to wobble. For a moment, I thought she might faint right there on the pavement, but instead, she turned around slowly, stiffly, and marched back to her house, shoulders tight, face burning, defeated in a way she'd never experienced before. The neighborhood erupted into applause. Keller gave me a small nod. "Have a good day, Lieutenant. Thanks." I said, "Drive safely." And with that, he left, leaving behind the smoldering remains of Caroline's pride and the echoes of laughter that would haunt her for weeks. The war she started was over, but the consequences, those were just beginning. After the day Officer Keller exposed the truth, most people would have curled up inside their homes for a week, maybe even moved to another county from sheer embarrassment. But not Caroline Mathers. No humiliation didn't humble her. It transformed her into something else entirely, a hurricane of denial. For 2 full days, she didn't leave her house. Curtains stayed drawn, no morning surveillance walk-bys, no passive-aggressive watering of her dying plants. The street felt unnervingly calm, like the eye of a storm quietly gathering strength. On the 3rd day, the storm hit, at 7:00 a.m. sharp. Just as I stepped out to grab the newspaper, her front door flew open. Out marched Caroline back straight, chin high, dressed in full HOA battle armor, pastel blazer, clipboard, oversized sunglasses, and a pen tucked behind her ear like she was preparing to write citations for the whole world. She walked directly toward me, heels stabbing the sidewalk. "We need to talk," she announced. I didn't move. "Morning, Caroline." She inhaled sharply, trying to regain the authority she'd lost so spectacularly. "I spoke with the HOA board," she said, "and contrary to what you may believe, your rank does not exempt you from community regulations." I sipped my coffee. "I never claimed it did." She faltered for half a second, just enough to break her rhythm, then continued. "You're Automobile, she said, as if the word automobile pained her, is still in violation of aesthetic standards. Even if you are, she made air quotes, a traffic lieutenant, it remains inappropriate for display. Inappropriate is not the same as illegal, I replied. It lowers the curb appeal, she insisted. Maybe to you. Her jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought she might try to rip the badge off my chest, just to prove something. Instead, she pulled a paper from her clipboard and thrust it forward. This is a petition, she declared. To impose mandatory garage storage for specialized vehicles, I have already collected 14 signatures. I glanced at the sheet. 12 of the signatures belonged to the same person, her. She'd just varied the handwriting slightly. 2 more were from her closest HOA board allies, who probably signed it to make her stop talking. Caroline, I said gently, I can't put my car in the garage yet. You know this? You've seen it under construction. That is not my concern. Solve it. I stared at her. By your logic, you'd rather I park it somewhere unsafe. If that's what it takes to restore the neighborhood's image, yes. And that was the moment I realized something important. Caroline didn't just want me to comply. She wanted to win. She wanted power restored, her pride repaired, her influence unquestioned. Embarrassment hadn't taught her anything. It had just made her desperate. The petition stunt was only the beginning. Later that afternoon, I found her talking to a group of neighbors in hushed voices near the mailbox cluster. When I walked by, they scattered like startled birds. Caroline stayed, meeting my eyes with a tight smile. Just explaining our community's concerns, she said. I asked, many residents are uncomfortable with the presence of your vehicle. Behind her, Mr. Henley shook his head vigorously, mouthing, No, we're not. Carolyn didn't notice. For the next week, she tried everything. She flagged down passing joggers, cornered dog walkers. He approached families, unloading groceries, all to convince them. My car posed some mysterious threat to the sanctity of property values. But the more she pushed, the more resistance she met. People were tired of being policed, tired of being watched, tired of pretending to agree with her to avoid becoming her next target. I saw the shift happening in real time. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact stopped to chat with me. A few apologized for the chaos. One woman brought over a batch of banana bread as a peace offering from the rest of us. Caroline noticed these interactions, and it infuriated her. Her surveillance escalated. She expanded Mather's command center, upgrading from a chair and a phone to a full folding table, 2 chairs, and a portable fan plugged into an extension cord that stretched across her lawn like a power-hungry snake. She sat there every morning, typing into her laptop as though documenting state secrets. Every time I left the house, she recorded it. Every time someone visited, she recorded that too. One morning, I walked outside to find her holding a walkie-talkie. To whom she thought she was speaking? I'll never know. But the breaking point, the moment she truly snapped, came when I decided to wash my car again. It was an innocent Saturday morning, sun bright, forecast clear, coffee strong. I rolled out the hose, popped open the bucket of suds, and started scrubbing the charger. I'd barely finished the roof when her chair scraped loudly across the pavement. She stomped toward me with her phone already recording. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. I blinked. Washing my car? On my property? This is inappropriate activity, she shrieked. Many things could be considered inappropriate: rudeness, trespassing, staging a miniature surveillance operation, but washing a car? How? I asked. She thrust the phone closer. This vehicle should not be displayed. You are deliberately provoking the community. I'm cleaning it. You are showing off. I wrung out the sponge. Caroline, go home. That did it. She began rattling off every imaginary rule violation she could conjure. I am the HOA president. I can cite you. I can fine you. I can have your vehicle removed if you refuse to comply. I will make this neighborhood peaceful again. By now, half the block was watching. Windows slid open, curtains twitched, phones lifted. Caroline, so lost in her tirade, didn't see any of it. You will never win this, she snarled. I have authority here, and if you won't respect the rules, I'll get the police involved again. This time, they will impound that car. I leaned against the hood, arms crossed, letting her rant, letting her say every outrageous thing she needed to say. And that's when the universe decided the scene wasn't dramatic enough. A police cruiser turned the corner. Not speeding, not with sirens, just casually rolling down the street like it belonged there. But to Caroline, it was a cavalry charge. She spun around, gasping, her fury melting into exhilaration. "Yes!" she yelled. "Finally, someone who will enforce the rules." She sprinted toward the cruiser, waving both arms. Behind me, neighbors held their breath, because everyone knew what she didn't. You can only call the police on a traffic cop so many times before the punchline hits. Caroline's triumphant march toward that cruiser would become neighborhood legend, and the moment Officer Johnson stepped out of the car, everything she believed about her power, her authority, and her control over Willow Bend Meadows was about to crumble for the second and final time. Officer Johnson stepped out of the cruiser with the kind of calm body language only seasoned patrol officers possessed. He closed the door gently, adjusted his belt, and surveyed the scene with professional neutrality. To him, this was probably just another neighborhood dispute until he saw me leaning against my Charger, arms crossed, and recognized exactly what kind of mess he'd walked into, but Caroline didn't give him a chance to breathe. "There!" she shouted, stabbing her finger toward me as if she were identifying a criminal mastermind. "That's the man. That vehicle is a violation of HOA standards, a danger to community aesthetics, and a clear impersonation of law enforcement. I need it impounded immediately." Johnson blinked once, slowly, the way an officer does when they're trying to process whether they've stepped into a sitcom. "Ma'am," he began politely, "I'm going to need you to slow down and—" "No," she barked. "You need to act. He's been flaunting that monstrosity in our neighborhood for months. Breaking rules, ignoring citations, harassing residents with its presence." I raised an eyebrow. "Harassing residents with its presence? Don't speak," she snapped. A ripple of murmurs spread among the watching neighbors. They were recording openly now. No more pretending to garden or fetch mail. This was entertainment. Officer Johnson cleared his throat. "Why don't we talk to the homeowner first?" Caroline scoffed. "Homeowner? Impersonator? You mean? You should have arrested him months ago. I've documented everything." She shoved her phone into Johnson's hands before he could refuse. He held it gingerly, scrolling through photo after photo of my car, each one taken at the same angle. At absurdly close range, as if she'd crawled onto my windshield, Johnson stifled a laugh. "And you want this vehicle impounded?" he asked. "Yes," she shouted. "He is pretending to be a police officer." At that, I nearly choked. Johnson handed her phone back and walked toward me. He kept his voice low. "Lieutenant, morning." I nodded. "Morning, Johnson." Caroline's head whipped around so fast her sunglasses nearly flew off. "Lieutenant," she whispered. "What did he say? Did he say—" "Lieutenant." I straightened up and walked toward the two of them, taking my sweet time. The neighbors leaned in collectively, as if watching the climax of a season finale. Officer Johnson decided to end the suspense. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "this is Lieutenant Mark Delaney of the Willow County Traffic Enforcement Division." If silence were a physical thing, it would have dropped from the sky and flattened Caroline right where she stood. "You," she stammered, "that's impossible. Why would a lieutenant live here?" I shrugged. "Affordable mortgage." Johnson cracked a smile and coughed to hide it. Caroline's jaw opened and closed like a malfunctioning puppet. But your car is... You can't just... Why didn't you tell me? You never asked," I said. Her face twisted. "You let me send all those notices, you let me issue citations, you let me hire tow trucks, and you let me wash my car in peace until today," I replied. "Seems fair." A burst of laughter erupted from the crowd. Someone clapped. Someone else yelled, "Tell her again." "Even Mr." Henley yelled. "We've been waiting for this moment." Johnson cleared his throat, trying desperately to stay professional, and addressed Caroline. "Ma'am, filing false reports, attempting to tow a police vehicle, and harassing a law enforcement officer are serious offenses. I'd strongly advise against any further action." "But I was enforcing the rules," she protested weakly. "HOA rules don't override state law," Johnson said, "or reality." Her shoulders slumped, her clipboard dangled from limp fingers. She looked like a queen whose castle had just been bulldozed. She turned toward me, voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" "Because," I said simply, "I wanted to see how far you'd take it, and now I know." Her sunglasses finally slipped off her hair and fell into the street. She didn't even try to pick them up. She just turned, stiffly, robotically, and walked back toward her house. Not a stomp, not a run, just a slow, defeated shuffle. As her door slammed shut, the neighborhood erupted into cheers. Honest-to-God applause echoed between the houses like we were at a live performance. Johnson leaned toward me. We definitely need body cameras for HOA calls. Don't give the board ideas, I muttered. He snorted, tipped his head in a goodbye gesture, and drove off. The crowd began to disperse, but not without a barrage of comments. About time. She had it coming. Lieutenant Delaney, please find her next. Best Saturday morning ever. I couldn't help but laugh. But while the war she started was effectively over, the aftermath was only beginning. HOA politics spread through Willow Bend Meadows faster than gossip in a church choir. By that evening, every porch in the neighborhood buzzed with retellings of the showdown. I overheard one couple recounting the story to their visiting friends. They reenacted the whole scene with dramatic gestures. She told him she'd impound a cop's car. The husband gasped. A cop? On his own driveway? No, his wife exclaimed. Did she really? Oh yes, he said. And then, boom. Officer Johnson said, "Good morning, Lieutenant," and Caroline turned redder than a tomato. I couldn't help smiling as I walked past. If nothing else, this whole ordeal had inspired some truly entertaining theater. But the real tipping point came that Sunday afternoon. An emergency HOA meeting notice was delivered door to door. The flyer was printed in large, bold letters. Mandatory meeting, urgent community matters, translation, Caroline's meltdown had consequences. I attended. Purely for the entertainment value, the room was packed. Even residents who avoided meetings like the plague were squeezed into the back. Everyone knew what this was about. Caroline sat at the front table looking like she'd just swallowed a lemon dipped in battery acid. Her hair was frizzed, her makeup uneven, and her clipboard conspicuously absent. HOA Vice President Marla Chesney called the meeting to order. As many of you are aware, she began, there was an incident involving former citations issued to a resident regarding an alleged impersonation vehicle. A ripple of laughter traveled through the room. Caroline's eye twitched. Marla continued, "It has come to our attention that certain actions were taken without full board approval, including the hiring of towing services, unwarranted documentation of a resident's property, and the misuse of community enforcement procedures." Caroline's face drained of color. "Therefore," Marla said, "the board will be reviewing all prior complaints and conduct of the HOA president." The room exploded into applause. Caroline leapt to her feet. "This is ridiculous. I was protecting this neighborhood. I was doing my duty as president." Marla calmly folded her hands. "You targeted a police officer. That was an accident. You targeted half the neighborhood, Caroline." Someone shouted from the back. "Your behavior is out of control," another yelled. "You're a menace," a third added. Caroline spun around, eyes wide, betrayed by the very people she thought she commanded. Her voice wavered. "I was just enforcing the rules." Marla cleared her throat. "The board votes to suspend your authority effective immediately." Another wave of cheers rolled through the room, louder this time, and just like that, the Queen of Willow Bend Meadows fell off her throne. She sank into her chair, stunned, defeated, and for the first time silent. As I walked out of the clubhouse, neighbors clapped me on the back, thanked me, laughed with me. But I knew there was one final chapter to this saga, because people like Caroline don't just vanish quietly, and the universe wasn't quite done teaching her lessons yet. For the first time since moving into Willow Bend Meadows, the neighborhood actually felt peaceful. No surveillance chair, no clipboard, no pastel blazer marching down the sidewalks like a suburban drill sergeant. After the emergency meeting stripped Caroline of her authority, the air felt lighter, as if the entire community had collectively exhaled a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. But peace doesn't settle easily on someone like Caroline Mathers. The morning after her removal, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee in hand and instantly noticed something strange. Her curtains, always drawn tight, were now cracked open just enough for a pair of eyes to peek out. The fabric twitched slightly when I looked toward her house. She was watching, hidden, but watching. Old habits die hard. I ignored it, hoping she'd eventually move on with her life. Perhaps take up yoga or scrapbooking, something less destructive than community surveillance. But a person like Caroline doesn't surrender gracefully. She stews, she strategizes, she recalculates, and, inevitably, she strikes again. It started small, A randomly misdelivered package left on my porch that belonged to someone on the next street over. A trash can nudged 2 inches out of alignment. A mysterious HOA brochure about community harmony slipped under my door. Innocent mistakes on the surface, except the person responsible, always left faint traces. The angle, the placement, the timing. It had Caroline's fingerprints all over them. Still, these were minor annoyances. I brushed them off. What I didn't brush off was the cold stares she began giving anyone who dared speak to me. One afternoon, as I chatted with a young couple walking their dog, the couple's smiles abruptly vanished. I followed their gaze and saw Caroline standing halfway down the sidewalk, arms crossed, glaring like a gargoyle guarding forbidden territory. The couple muttered an excuse and hurried away. The social tides had shifted. No longer queen, she had become a cautionary tale, someone people politely avoided, not obeyed. Shame alone might have humbled another person, but not Caroline. By the end of the week, she appeared in the community Facebook group with a lengthy post titled, "Concerns about Unfair Treatment and Abuse of Authority." In it, she wrote a dramatic retelling of the HOA meeting, except in her version, she was a whistleblower punished for protecting the community from potential danger. She claimed her removal was politically motivated. She hinted at corruption. She even suggested I had coerced the board using my law enforcement influence. The comments section did not go the way she expected. "Caroline, please stop. You caused this yourself. You tried to tow a traffic cop's car. How do you not see the problem? We all just want a peaceful neighborhood." She replied to each comment with escalating anger until the admin muted her for 24 hours. But she wasn't done. Not even close. 2 days later, she re-emerged with a new tactic, a petition. Again, this time, instead of demanding vehicle approval, she demanded an investigation into unethical police intimidation techniques used to silence a civilian. She went door to door, trying to get signatures. Most residents declined politely, some closed their doors outright. One neighbor recorded her rant and uploaded it to the Facebook group with the caption, "Day 3 of Caroline's downfall speed run." It got 87 laughing reactions. By this point, even I began to feel a little bad for her. Not enough to intervene, but enough to hope she'd take the hint and disappear quietly. Instead, she doubled down. Late one evening, while I sat reading in my living room, motion lights flickered on in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Caroline creeping along the edge of my lawn, phone raised, taking slow, methodical photos of my car as if collecting forensic evidence. She wore all black leggings, sweater, even a beanie, and tiptoed like she was infiltrating enemy territory. I opened the door. "Evening, Caroline," she squeaked, nearly dropping her phone. I was just documenting ongoing violations," she stammered. "There are no violations," I said calmly. "You're not HOA president anymore." She straightened her shoulders, eyes flashing with stubborn defiance. "That doesn't mean I can't fight for what's right." "You're trespassing." "No, I'm..." "Caroline." I stepped closer. "Go home." For a moment I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not anger, not pride, but fear. Real fear. The kind that surfaces when someone realizes the world has moved on without them, and they're standing alone in the wreckage of their own making. She retreated slowly, her voice cracking. "This isn't over." The thing is, it was over. Everyone knew it but her. The next morning, I received an email from the new HOA president, Marla. She wanted to meet with me to formally apologize for Caroline's behavior. We sat at her kitchen table, sipping iced tea while she explained the board's decision to audit all previous violation notices. "We've discovered patterns," Marla said delicately. "Abuse of authority, selective enforcement, retaliation." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "It gets worse." She created a database of residents she labeled risk factors. I choked on my drink. She made a blacklist. Marla nodded grimly. "Your name is..." Bolded. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be offended. "Look," she said gently, "we can't fix everything overnight, but I want you to know we're trying, and if you ever feel unsafe because of Caroline, please tell us. I can handle myself," I assured her. "But thank you." As I walked home, I couldn't help feeling that the storm was finally breaking up, its power fading, its thunder softening into distant rumblings. But Willow Bend Meadows had one last twist to deliver. A week after her midnight surveillance stunt, Caroline's SUV tore down our street far faster than the posted 20 miles per hour speed limit. She screeched into her driveway, slammed her door, and darted inside without looking at anyone. 2 hours later, her mailbox clattered shut as she retrieved a small white envelope. I knew the envelope style instantly. A traffic citation. Karma, it seems, has a sense of humor. The next morning, she marched into the traffic department, building my building, clutching the ticket like it was a personal attack from the universe. I was finishing reports when I heard the unmistakable sound of her voice echo across the lobby. I demand to speak to someone in charge. This ticket is unjust. An officer poked his head into my office. Lieutenant, you might want to see this. I stepped into the lobby. Caroline froze. Her jaw dropped. The color drained from her face. I offered her the most polite smile I could manage. Hello, Caroline. How can I help you today? She didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then, very quietly, she whispered, Of course. Why? I took the ticket from her trembling hand and processed it with complete fairness. No special treatment, no added sting, just the law. When she left, she didn't yell, she didn't argue, she didn't even glare. She just walked out the door with a strange, humbled silence. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed human, and maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned something. For days after the ticket incident at the traffic department, Willow Bend Meadows existed in a kind of uncertain calm, like everyone was waiting to see what version of Caroline would re-emerge. The tyrant who ruled with a pastel blazer and a clipboard, or the humbled woman who had walked out of my office with quiet resignation. Even I didn't know which one to expect. But something had changed in her. For the first time since I moved to the neighborhood, Caroline didn't stare me down from behind her curtains. No more surveillance chair, no more pacing the sidewalk with her phone camera poised like a weapon. Her house became strangely quiet, lights on at night, blinds half open during the day, but no activity. Neighbors exchanged whispers about her absence, unsure whether to be relieved or concerned. A few residents even came to my door just to update me. Her car hasn't moved in 3 days. She didn't come to the gardening club. She walked right past me and didn't correct the placement of my trash bin. I almost fainted. Everyone had an opinion, but nobody had an answer. It wasn't until the following Saturday morning that I finally saw her again. I was fixing a loose board on my fence when her front door opened. She stepped out, slowly, cautious, almost timid, and paused on her porch, like someone taking in sunlight after being underground. She didn't glance at my car. She didn't glare at me. She simply walked down her driveway, checked her mailbox, and returned inside without a word. I stared after her, caught off guard. That was it. No drama, no accusations, no sudden declaration of a new HOA committee designed specifically to audit the vehicular compliance of property exteriors. It seemed impossible, and yet it was real. The neighborhood, sensing the shift, began breathing again. Children played outside without her critiquing their chalk drawings. Families took walks without her timing the length of their conversations. People watered their lawns without worrying. She'd lecture them about water pressure ratios. The change was subtle at first, but within a week, Willow Bend Meadows felt like a community again, instead of a kingdom. And against all odds, life began to return to normal. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on my porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset paint the houses orange. A few neighbors waved as they walked by. Someone's dog barked playfully across the street. A group of kids rode their scooters past my driveway, one shouting, "Hey, Mr. Delaney," before speeding off. For the first time since moving here, I felt at home. But as peaceful as things seemed, I knew the story wouldn't truly end until the neighborhood and Caroline faced what came next. That moment arrived during the next official HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Word had spread quickly. The board was ready to reveal the results of the internal audit they had launched into Caroline's prior conduct. The audit had examined every violation notice, every fine, every record she had kept, many of which she had written by hand, apparently unwilling to trust even her own board members. Marla, the new HOA president, stood at the front with a stack of papers so thick it looked like a college thesis. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "We've completed a thorough review of the actions taken by the former HOA president, Ms. Mathers." A murmur spread through the room. All eyes drifted to Caroline, who sat stiffly in the second row, hands clasped in her lap. She looked smaller, somehow still proud, still upright, but not burning with the same fervor she once wielded like a weapon, Marla continued. We discovered that many of the citations issued were not only unjustified, but targeted. She paused for emphasis. Targeted at specific residents, often without cause. A few heads turned toward me. We also found evidence of selective enforcement, harassment, and fabrication of community complaints. In at least 9 cases, Ms. Mathers filed violations under false names. A gasp rippled through the room. One neighbor whispered, "I knew my cousin Sarah didn't actually report my welcome mat." Marla sighed. Given the severity of these findings, the board has unanimously decided on the following actions. All citations issued during Ms. Mathers' tenure will be voided, all fines will be refunded, and all future enforcement decisions will require full board approval, not unilateral authority. Applause erupted. But Marla wasn't finished. We would also like to extend a formal apology to Lieutenant Delaney for the harassment and undue stress caused by false impersonation claims and attempts to remove his vehicle. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I simply nodded. And finally, Marla said, "Ms. Mathers has agreed to permanently step down from any leadership role within the HOA." The applause was thunderous, genuine, cathartic. Caroline didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't storm out. She simply sat there, staring at the floor, her face unreadable. For the first time, she seemed to understand the magnitude of the damage she had caused, not just to me, but to everyone around her. After the meeting ended, residents gathered outside the clubhouse, chatting happily, relieved the chaos was finally behind them. That's when I saw her. Caroline stood alone near the walkway, holding a small folder against her chest. She wasn't glaring at anyone. She wasn't demanding control. She wasn't even pretending to be unfazed. She looked tired. As I stepped past her, she spoke without raising her eyes. "Lieutenant Delaney," I paused. "Yes, I wanted to say I'm sorry." The words were soft, but heavy, like they cost her something to release. "For what exactly?" I asked gently. She swallowed. "For all of it, the letters, the meetings, the accusations. I wasn't handling things well." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate the apology." She looked up then, and for the first time since I had met her, there was no fire in her eyes, no defensiveness, no superiority, just a woman who finally realized the consequences of her actions. "I hope," she said quietly, "that someday this neighborhood will remember me for something else." "That's up to you," I replied. She gave a small, sad smile. "I know." She walked away, shoulders slumped, but lighter somehow. As I headed home, I realized something important. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about truth finally being acknowledged. Sometimes it's about the community healing. And sometimes it's simply about people becoming better versions of themselves after being forced to face their worst. The next time I saw Caroline was at the grocery store a few weeks later. She noticed me first, and instead of ducking away or pretending not to see me, she gave me a small, respectful nod. And I nodded back. Not friends, not enemies, just neighbors. And for Willow Bend Meadows, that was more than enough. Stories like this always remind me of something simple but often forgotten. Authority without humility becomes a weapon, power without empathy becomes destruction, and pride, when left unchecked, can turn even a quiet suburban street into a battleground. But the opposite is also true. Communities thrive when people listen, when they admit mistakes, when they choose fairness over ego and respect over control. Sometimes the greatest lessons come wrapped in embarrassment, but they still offer us a chance to grow if we're willing to learn. So tell me, have you ever faced an HOA nightmare like this? Share your own story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss how these battles unfold, and how they end with the justice they deserve.